just that conversation by itself created a safe place where this young entrepreneur opened up and said, well, if you're sharing, I'm going to share too. And
Today I have Doug Lawrence with me, and it's time to discuss being a mentor. Doug, thanks for joining me today.
well, thank you for the opportunity.
Being a mentor, I know pretty much nothing about this. How does one actually, we're jumping right in, by the way. How does someone actually become a mentor? Is this something that someone approaches someone and asks to be a mentor, or someone's like, I want to beef up my resume, I want to be a mentor to someone? How does this relationship begin?
Well, there's a couple different ways. Number one, you could be part of an organization that actually has a mentoring program. That's kind of one way. There's a couple of organizations, like one that I do mentoring for is the Sir Richard Branson Entrepreneur Program in the Caribbean. And so I'm a volunteer mentor for their program, working with young entrepreneurs to help them get their business started and get moving forward with that. So that's certainly one way. I get a lot of referrals, so I get people that sort of say, "Gee, Doug, could you be my mentor?" And so then we have a conversation about all of that, and then as part of some of the work that I'm doing, like I'm doing some work right now for an organization in the health industry where I have become the bridge between when they get medical help, and by medical I mean counseling, social work, psychologists, psychiatrists, all of that. I'm the bridge between when I had my appointment yesterday, knowing that I don't have access to anyone now for 4 to 6 months, but oh gee, I have my mentor that I can go to who will walk beside me. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's a number of different ways that you can get access to a mentor.
Okay, so that's interesting. So when I first thought of a mentor, I thought of strictly in like a corporate environment where it's like you're basically helping someone that is within the organization kind of grow and develop and get the skills they need to continue to succeed professionally and essentially climb the ladder kind of scenario. But it's neat that you brought up all these other instances where a mentor could be available. And that reminds me, I spoke to someone quite a while ago, and I forget who it was, but they talked about this. I forget what it's called, but there's an acronym. It's with a small business association, I think, where they actually have retired business professionals mentoring small business owners. And that's kind of one of the things that sounds like you're tackling in, I want to say the Caribbean. I don't know if that was right, though.
The
Yeah. Okay.
Caribbean. Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad to hear that you're talking about volunteering and doing this, because when I was doing some rudimentary research for our conversation today, it sounded like some people might actually look to do this to get paid, or people pay people to get mentors. Have you any experience with that? Is that common? Is the volunteering more common? What's that like?
I do both. So I do volunteer stuff because my favorite mantra is I'll never leave you on the island by yourself. So if you reach out and you tell me I have no money to pay me, to pay you to be my mentor, we're going to have a conversation about how can we make that happen. But you're absolutely correct. If you do any research whatsoever on pay versus free or pro bono, there's a unique blend, and it seems that the higher you climb the corporate ladder, the more chances you're going to run into that paid mentor than somebody at a entry grassroots sort of level, like that sort of thing. But one thing that we always talk about, and you kind of alluded to it, was the aspect of, it's typically in the corporate environment, and it's where the mentoring is done for professional development. So let me first maybe premise that with the definition. Mentoring is a two-way trusted relationship where both the mentor and mentee learn and grow together on a personal and professional basis. Now, what you had talked about was the professional basis. We forget about the personal side. So self-esteem, self-worth, self-doubt, all, as I call them, all the selves. And I mean, we need to we you need to be able to take a look at it from both avenues, because if somebody is struggling with self-esteem, it doesn't matter what you say or do, they're going to struggle with self-esteem, and that's critical to them moving forward.
That's really interesting. I hadn't considered that the two-way street. That's very interesting. So if someone is looking to get started, they're looking for a mentor. What are some typical paths they take? Do they do an internet search? How does someone find a mentor, or the other way around? How does a mentor find a mentee?
It's probably easier for the mentor to find the mentee because, obviously because of the demand and especially if it's, somebody that has been mentoring people in the past and has developed, it has become credible in doing what they're doing. On the flip side, the mentee, what I usually tell people, and I get a lot of, inquiries about where do I go to get where can I go to find a mentor and all that sort of stuff. And I usually steer them to business associations, where they could tap into business people. They can put a call out to, don't be afraid to sort of put a call out and say, I'd like to find someone to mentor me. Do you happen to know anybody? So, engage in those sorts of interactions to try and see if you can find somebody that's going to be willing to work with you.
Okay. Now, this is a very rudimentary question. When someone is looking for a mentor, is it for usually a particular cause? Like I'm looking to get this skill, I'm looking to get to this place mentally, or is it a little more open-ended where it's like I'm looking to grow? What's that like?
A good example is, oh, I need to have an industry specific mentor, somebody that's worked in the industry. No, you don't. In fact, I work in a number of different industries and I don't have that particular industry experience. But what I do bring to the table is lived experience, which can be transferable to a number of different industries. But at the same time, what that's also done is my approach to mentoring is one that's based on being able to be flexible enough and take my lived experience and apply it to any particular situation. I've worked in the health sector. I've worked in manufacturing. I've provided mentoring to leadership teams in organizations. So there's, and all of it is premised around the fact that there are some tools that you need to have in your mentoring toolkit. And if you have those tools and you have the lived experience, you pretty much can take on, anybody as far as mentor-mentee type of a relationship.
Let's talk about the longevity of the relationship between a mentor and a mentee. Is this something that, and it's obviously going to be different for everyone, but typically, is this more of like a relationship that continues in this way for like a couple months, a couple years, on and off for a couple years, depending on what kind of skills people are looking to grow? What is that typically like?
What'll drive the answer to that question is the type of relationship that gets built. I have some people that I'm still mentoring after 7 or 8 years, and typically they're in leadership positions and they're just looking to have that mentor as somebody they can bounce an idea off and say, gee, I'm thinking of doing this or doing something, in that premise. And would you be able to, give me a hand to sort of navigate my way through that? And as long as you're not telling, you're asking questions to guide, then, it's good. But I had a leadership team. In fact, this was the first year we didn't renew the contract, but it would have been 7 or 8 years that I had been working with as many as 6 or 7 leaders to as few as 1 or 2.
Let's hang on that for a second. So you talked about you're under contract. This is the first time they didn't renew it. How does someone actually get started with that contract? Did you approach an organization and say, "Hi, I'm a mentor. I would like to work with your team"? Did they approach you? Did you already know someone there? How did that start?
I was doing mentoring, and the organization that wanted some help reached out. And long story short, I was interviewed by one of the more senior people to determine, okay, what's the value that you can bring to the table for us? Because here's our problem. Introduced me to the main person that I was going to be mentoring, and then from there it grew. So we did I don't know, a couple months where I said, why don't you just kick the tires and see what it's like? And if it works for you, then let's get into an agreement where, we can talk about getting paid versus doing it for free, right? So, and that's what we did. And that was the start of a 7 or 8 year relationship.
Let's talk about measuring success for a mentor and a mentee. So you talked about how you initially went in, they interviewed you. Okay, so invariably, I'm thinking of questions. It's like, well, what have you done in the past? Who have you helped in the past? What milestones did you accomplish? How do you measure success and translate that through the interview process? What kind of things are they looking for?
I come at it from a value perspective. So in the interview, and I did this in a number of different situations. At the beginning, I said, "This is what I can bring to the table. And if at any time either one of us feels that I'm off the mark, I'm missing where we're going, we need to have that conversation. And I may not be the right person for you or for your organization. And I will work with you to help you find somebody that is a better fit." Now, as to why you should pick me, I've been mentoring for, I forget how many years it was then, but I've been in the business of mentoring since 2010. I've accumulated in excess of, I think I'm at about 35 to 4,000 hours of mentoring. And I am probably one of very few mentors that has an international certification for mentoring, such as what I do. And what I found was to slip that certification piece in there was in some cases was the straw that broke the camel's back. And it ended up that was what they based their decision on, was the international certification.
I had no idea certification existed on any level for mentoring. That is fascinating. Okay, so let's hang on that now. So if someone wants to get some kind of certification, are there a number of certificates, like one higher than the next, or is it just a handful, then they're dished out to a particular organization? How does someone get those certifications?
The international mentoring community provides for the certification of mentors, and it's a certification that is premised on ISO standards. So you go through a process of creating your profile, your portfolio, sorry, and then you go through a verification. So the verification process is typically an hour and a half to 2 hour interview where you're asked to provide experiences, and then you're kind of grilled to some extent on, how did you get those experiences? Can you tell us, the whole process of going through that? So yeah, so that was pretty much, from that part of it. The certification process can take anywhere from 4 to 6 months to go through to do it. The big thing is building up your portfolio with the number of hours of mentoring, so that because you need to have, some examples of where you've applied mentoring processes and concepts and stuff like that. So, that part fits into that quite nicely.
So sticking with that slightly, let's talk about formal education. Is there an avenue of formal education that would be particularly beneficial if someone wants to be a mentor? Or should they study psychology? Should they study human behavior? Is any of that helpful or not so much?
There's been a lot of self-education that I've done, but it's only because what I've been trying to do is advance mentoring in the world, so to speak. And like right now, I'm working on mentoring being part of the support group for mental health. I'm constantly researching new approaches, different techniques, and knowing where the line in the sand is between what can be considered to be mentoring and what has to be a psychologist, psychiatrist, or that, so that we don't there's an ethics and a legal issue if I cross over into the professional territory. I may find myself in a bit of hot water. So it's knowing where that line in the sand is.
Interesting. So I was speaking with Steve Gamlin back, back in July, his episode came out, and he was a visualization coach. And we had a conversation where at one point we talked about if someone was having, if someone needed to seek the help of a mental health professional, he would send them their way. He would not work with them until whatever needed to be resolved was resolved, essentially. And I asked him, "Do you ever work in tandem with mental health professionals?" He said no. That it was the nature of his work. It was they were not in direct conflict, but it was like to get to be most beneficial, the person needed to work with the mental health person, and then he would be happy to continue working with them. So, kind of like what you were saying now, would the same ring true for you that that you wouldn't necessarily work hand in hand with a mental health professional, that there might be not conflict, but it could make things a little more challenging, where someone should see the mental health professional first, or it doesn't matter? What's your take on that?
When I go into a mentoring session, and it could be for the very first time, is that I'm doing kind of a scan, whatever, however you want to describe it. But what I'm trying to do is get a sense of whereabouts this person is, and are there some things that we need to have a conversation about before the relationship goes any further. And a good example is I worked with an individual who was an entrepreneur starting their own business, and we met the first time virtually. And I just, for whatever the reason, there was something that told me, tell your story, tell your story. And so I talked about being a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer, retired, and how, as a result of my service and the trauma and all that stuff, I ended up with post-traumatic stress. And then I went on to talk about having to deal with grief, the loss of my wife, and all that. And that conversation by itself created a safe place where this young entrepreneur opened up and said, well, if you're sharing, I'm going to share too. And I've been diagnosed with 4 different mental health issues, and I'm concerned that it's going to impact my ability to be able to move my business forward. And so it was at that stage that I said, well, I want you to make sure that you're seeking professional help. I will help you advance your business because I've dealt with PTSD and I've dealt with grief, and that I'm not done dealing with it, but at least I've had that experience. And so I can sort of help you on that side, but the other side, I'm going to encourage you to seek professional help. So somewhat similar to what, the example you gave.
Doug, this is all super, super awesome information that you're giving us, but you're also an author, and I'd be remiss if we didn't address that a little bit and have you talk about you as a writer. My understanding, you have published 2 books with a third one on the way, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So talk to us about that. So the first one was a self-publish, and then the second 2 are going through, well, the second one went through a traditional publisher, and the third one the same way. Talk about the process between the 2. Were they very different? Obviously, the one is more hands-on on your end. But as far as headaches go, what was that like? Was the first one all kinds of headaches? The second one just a different kind of headaches? Or was the second one more seamless? What was that like?
I used a ghostwriter for the first one, so didn't have a clue what I was doing. And if it wasn't for the ghostwriter kind of guiding me along the way, I don't know, we'd probably still be having the conversation about, gee, you should publish a book. And the book was, the title was The Gift of Mentoring. And so the ghostwriter took it through the whole process and got it out there, got it on Amazon, did the ISBN numbers and all that sort of stuff. And I'd be remiss if I didn't, acknowledge the work that individual did, for me. So that was good. And then, and maybe I'll back up really quickly, was that how that book came to be was that I had been writing blog articles on a number of different mentoring related topics. And some of my colleagues said, well, you should take those blog articles, put them all, mush them together and create a book. And so I went, oh, okay, we can do that. And they said, get a ghostwriter to help you. This is your first time, so do that. So I did, and we pushed it out. The book was published for the main reason of kind of mentoring 101. It was to give people the idea, the basics of what mentoring was and all that sort of thing. And then the same sort of thing happened was I was trying to help people with a number of different issues and stuff. And some of my colleagues once again said you should write another book. And so that's where You Are Not Alone is my second book. And I had my publicist referred me to a friend of his who actually said, well, I'll publish the book for you. And they just took over and did everything. And once again, God bless her, I don't know what I would have done because I was still like a duck out of water and didn't understand what I was doing. And she stayed focused and took us all the way through. As a result of that, You Are Not Alone became an Amazon #1 bestseller and in North America and the UK, and it propelled me to an international best-selling author. So I went like, what just happened? This was not part of the plan, but I'm not going to cast it aside, that's for sure. So the book that we're working on now is the title as of today is The Silent Pandemic, and it's a blend of talking about cancer, mental health, mentoring, and grief.
It's interesting you talking about it. Well, first, congrats on being a bestseller on Amazon. That is really, really cool. I was speaking with Erica Silverman. She's an estate attorney and also an author, New York Times bestseller. And she was talking to me about that, how like one day, basically the New York Times contacted her and said, we want to talk to you about this book essentially. And she was like, wait, what? Me? Are you sure? So I can only imagine what that must be like, especially, you're just writing something and then all of a sudden, you get this huge recognition. That is really, really cool. So congrats on that. So one thing I want to say, if someone wants to get started as a mentor, they just decide this is for them, how's the best way for them to actually just do it?
When I first started, I was helping university college students with job hunting. So resume, cover letter, interview skills, interview prep, all that sort of stuff. And then as things went on, what ended up happening was that I'd work and help them get a job, and then what would end up happening would be that something would happen in the workplace where they didn't know how to deal with it. So they'd say, well, let's talk to Doug. He'll know.
Doug, I'm running a little bit short on time, but one thing I like to do whenever I'm speaking with someone is give them the opportunity to talk about a project they're working on, a cause they believe in. If you'd like to talk more about your books or something like that, the floor is yours to discuss whatever you'd like to discuss.
For me, the big thing is what I'm working on right now is the aspect of the whole mental health and dealing with grief and helping people work their way through that and using mentoring process and techniques to be able to do that. And it's the realization that mentoring isn't just about career development and stuff like that. It goes way beyond that. And we could talk for hours, what does that look like? And the book is part of that. And I'm truly blessed that Mickey's part of my go-to team. And everybody that I talk to has said that, you're making a difference. Please keep doing what you're doing. And Mickey's standing right beside me the whole time to do that. So
that is awesome. Yeah, Mickey, he was on our show back also in the summer of 24, I believe. But great guy. He sent several people my way, which I absolutely love. I'm very grateful to him for that. And kind of like what you're saying before, going back to mentoring, it's not just a corporate thing, it's talking about mental health and people navigating that avenue and everything. So one thing I really love about this, like talking to different people and just learning so much, I think I know so much already, and then I realize just how little I really know, and I love it. Absolutely love it. Doug, it's been absolutely fantastic having you on Time We Discuss, and we learned what it's like to be a mentor.
Well, and thank you so much for this opportunity.